right, so again, welcome to our Civic Lex Redistricting Workshop. We are focusing again on Districts 3 and 10. Let's get started. So what is Civic Lex? So Civic Lex is hosting this presentation. My name is Megan. I am the Director of Programs at Civic Lex. And we also have Kit, who's the Director of Evaluation, again, who's sort of manning the chat. So Civic Lex is a nonprofit civic education organization, located, I would say, located in Lexington, Kentucky. Our home base is Lexington, Kentucky. We're sort of only concerned with Lexington. So we work to help people understand how local government works and how they can get more involved and more engaged in sort of the day-to-day processes and decisions of local government. So that's kind of what we do. We do that in a variety of ways. We have a lot of programs going on right now. One of them is this workshop series. Along with redistricting workshops, we've got a reading group that's happening, and we have a few other events like a bingo night and a sip and paint night coming up, focused on redistricting as well. So look for those in our calendar. We're also doing, if you've heard of the CARE program, or the Civic Artists in Residence program, that's another big project we're working on where we have 3 local artists kind of installed in city government and working on a project that will better connect sort of city employees and residents and sort of make their work a little bit more visible and participatory. So stay tuned for that. That's a longer term project that'll come up in, will end in July of next year, I believe. So it's a longer term project, should be hearing more about that. And we have a million other things going on. So please do check out our website at civiclex.org to see what's going on and how you can get involved. So what is redistricting? That's what we're here to talk about today. So redistricting is the process of changing the size and shape of political districts to adjust for how communities grow and change. It's constitutionally mandated and happens every 10 years based on data from the decennial census. And these districts range from the national, so you have congressional districts, you're probably familiar with that, to the state, so you have your state legislature, and all the way down to what we're looking at today, so your local, your council and school board levels. Again, it happens every 10 years. I'm sure most of you took the decennial census. It happened in 2020. It was a little bit, I think COVID really made it difficult. I know some people were census workers. I think Kit was actually a census worker. And it just disrupted the process a lot. But we have the numbers now. We got the data back in August, and we're able to see how population changed in Lexington. So that's the main thing. Population moves around over time. People, shift to, or, a lot of people move to different neighborhoods. Sorry, I'm trying to admit somebody and I can't do it without, oh well, sorry person. Yeah, so people just move around in a district over time, and so you need to adjust the size of the districts and sort of like what areas they encompass over time to account for those changes and to make sure that representation stays fairly equal. There we go. So why redistrict? Again, places change. So redistricting redraws our political boundaries to account for that change and make sure that in an ideal process, people are represented appropriately. So again, as people move around in an area, there might be more population, say like the southeast corner of the county, but that's not great because we want pretty much equal representation in each district. So you kind of have to shift little pieces of that district or precincts around to account for that population change. We'll get more into that in a little bit in a few other slides. So who redistricts in Lexington? In some places, lawmakers themselves redraw their own boundaries. That's not what happens here, but it is what happens in some places. Others have independent redistricting commissions. It's pretty much what Lexington does. Those redrawing legislative boundaries have to take into account the common interests and voting power of communities that currently exist while predicting how communities will change moving forward. So that was one thing the redistricting committee, and Matt will probably talk about this in a few minutes. One thing they took into account though was that they ended up looking at 2 different maps. There was the iterative 1 and iterative 2. And each of those maps looked at population a different way. One looked at it with the 2020 numbers that we received from the census last year, and the other one looked at predicted numbers for 2030. So they were trying to make those, so kind of combine the data from those maps and the way of looking at Lexington from those maps into one working map. But it was harder because, like you don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. It's hard to predict, but you do want to see where land is, where available land is, and then sort of assume that that's where people are probably going to go. If there's available land, that's where a new subdivision is probably going to go up. So then predicting, how big is that going to be? How many people might move there? So all of that has to be taken into account. Probably went on a bit of a tangent there. Back to the bullet point. And sometimes those redrawing, these boundaries can redraw boundaries to protect their own interests. That's called gerrymandering, if you've heard of that. And there are different ways boundaries can be drawn to affect that, and we'll go into it more. So when you're drawing boundaries, think of this as a population. These dots as a population in an area. And if you look at them, they're all equal. Like you have 6 of the red dots and 6 of the green dots. And you want to split those up into 4 different, say, districts or different, boundaries, something like that. There are a few different ways that you could do this. And there's a way that you can do it more equitably and a way that you could do it less equitably. So in the first, kind of the most simple way to split them up would just be, 4 groups of 3. They're all going to be 4 groups of 3, but this way it just goes, horizontally, row, row, row. But this shows you that it doesn't really equitably represent the population. You have 3 districts that are majority red, whereas that is not what the actual population numbers tell you. You're equal. But in this version, you have 3 districts that are overrepresented. So what's another way that you could do this? It's kind of the opposite with this one, where they're drawn a little bit different, a little bit more complicated. But again, you have the greens this time being the majority represented, and then you have 1 district of all red. And again, that's not representative of the sort of like the reality of what's happening with these 2 populations. So in the third, it's the kind of most complicated way of drawing districts here, but it's the most equitable, because you have 1 district each where the red and the green are both, or all, like that 1 is all red, 1 is all green, and then 1 is majority green and 1 is majority red. So that reflects the population demographics as you have it sort of before you've drawn the boundaries. These are equitable boundaries. And again, that's not always the most simple way to draw it. And that can be an issue when you see gerrymandering. You might think like there's something wrong going on there. That's not always the case, because sometimes you have to draw a boundary a little bit more in a more complicated way to make it equitable. So it's important to look at what's actually happening in the districts themselves to assess, is it an equitable district or is it not? So that's a example that we came up with that we're kind of proud of. So drawing boundaries, how boundaries are drawn, again, can have profound impacts for different neighborhoods, communities of interest, racial groups, and more. So as you saw from those little diagrams, you can get a good idea of how that works. So let's take a pause. I'm gonna try to stop screen sharing. Yeah, stop share. What do you all, let's see, and I can finally admit this person, I'm sorry. What did you all take away from that information so far? Feel free to chime in. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And if no one is going to raise their hand, I'm gonna call on somebody. Mackenzie, what do you think? Mackenzie is not answering.
There we go. Hey, I am.
Hey.
Do any of you guys have anything that stuck out to you far? Any observations? Anything from the presentation that's been really interesting so far? Zach?
The most equitable drawing of districts is not always the most conventional.
Were you able to hear that again?
Is the most equitable drawing the most conventional?
Zach said that something that stood out to him was that the most equitable way of drawing districts is not always the most conventional.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, yeah, like that. I thought that diagram was so great. But that shows you, yeah, you could draw, a really simple and something that looks very rational, and then it doesn't actually end up representing the population that you have. So sometimes they do look a little, more unconventional or a little more complicated than you would imagine to be equitable. That's a good question. Anyone else?
It always stands out to me that Lexington appoints residents and citizens to do the redistricting instead of just having the people who are directly empowered doing it. That's a really good process, and it's better than a lot of cities across the United States. So I always appreciate that.
Why do you think that's important?
I think, fairness and having people who are actually living in the districts being represented in the process. And I think it kind of prepares the process for better public input because the departments involved are already needing to explain something to this committee of residents. So then it's just a slightly easier step forward to explain it to the broader community. And I think, we've seen some really good efforts by planning and GIS this year to try to bring this to more people, which I appreciate.
Awesome. Thanks, Kit. What about the rest? Got, let's see, Kate and Amy. Any questions or comments from you all? Nope.
I'm good.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Cool. Well, then in that case, I will keep going with the rest of the presentation. I'll go ahead and screen share again. Screen share. No, where is it? Technology. All right, so we've got new information. So how does this kind of break down in Lexington? So Lexington has an independent, as Kit mentioned, Lexington has an independent redistricting commission that is appointed by council members. And this process is all run by the vice mayor. So if you've heard the name Steve Kay, he's our vice mayor. And so he sort of, orchestrates this whole thing. And it's pretty complicated, as Matt will talk about. And then the vice mayor's aide, legislative aide, has done a ton of work as well. And then there's GIS, working on maps. Like, it's a whole team that's working on this process. It's really interesting how it's all come together. So it's pretty important to remember that Lexington has a nonpartisan government. We don't have, like Republicans or like a Republican Party and a Democratic Party on city council. They might have their own personal political views and political affiliations, but on council there is no, like party line like that. It's just nonpartisan, which is pretty cool. I think that makes politics and like policy in Lexington really interesting because those associations don't really exist. So you have, who you might think is a conservative council member voting for a very progressive issue, on one vote, and then sometimes you have really progressive people voting for more conservative things sometimes. So it's fun to see that kind of just, I don't know, you just can't predict it sometimes, which I think makes it more exciting. You don't know how people are going to vote some of the time. So how it works is each council member appoints one person from their district to represent their district's interests. Sometimes it's, if people have a lot of experience with geography and maps, as a person like Matt, or just like know a lot about neighborhoods in the district. I think that's important. One thing I've noticed from going to the meetings is that everyone seems to have a really good understanding of, like what neighborhoods are in their district, who lives in those neighborhoods, how long they've been there, and what it would mean to lose or gain neighborhoods sort of on the boundaries. It's important to keep that in mind because one of the guidelines was to, like maintain the character of the district kind of, and keep neighborhoods intact. Sometimes it's not always possible, as you'll see. And so it's important to understand like what the consequences of potentially breaking up a neighborhood or adding a neighborhood could be to the district. And then finally, council members are not supposed to be in contact with their redistricting representative about their district boundaries. So we learned that pretty early on when we were planning this series. We had originally invited the council members and the district and the committee representatives to these workshops. And the first few were like, yeah, that's a great idea, we'll be there. And then a few more are like, no, that's an ethical concern, because the council members didn't really want to know what was going on in the committees, and they didn't want to feel like they were influencing the committee member and their decisions. So that's pretty key as well. So the council members are really not involved in the process. Now they have some say. As we'll see, the working map has been released. So the council members are looking at that now and kind of assessing it. So they're brought into the process now, but as the map is being drawn, they're really not there at all. Supposed to be. I don't know for sure if that's how it happens, but I think that's pretty much how it goes. So moving on, so Lexington has a set of guidelines for redistricting that is adopted by the commission. So that happened early on in the first meeting, they adopted those guidelines. I think it's a set of 13, and you can read those on the city's redistricting hub if you just search Redistricting Lexington. If you go to lexingtonky.gov, you can find all of that there. They have a really great information hub that's got like all the maps, all the census data, the guidelines, and the notes from the meetings. It's a good place to find all that. You can also look that up on civiclex.org. We have a lot of we have our own notes and things like that, but a lot of the same information is up. So these rules include recommendations for population count, the smallest units that can be changed, which are voting precincts, and things like not excluding city council members and not breaking up neighborhood associations, like I mentioned in the previous slide. So ideally, they wanted to keep council members in the district that they are now, which I think they did. They were able to do that. And then as for voting precincts, yeah, you can't really move a whole district or just like, pick up a piece of land where you want to. You have to do it by these smaller voting precincts. So that's a difficult thing too, because you have to have certain population counts in some precincts that might make sense. Just visually might be either too much, might either have too many or too few people to be able to take them away from a district or add them to a district to make the whole population count work. It's kind of, Matt will explain this more, it's kind of complicated, but not too complicated. I think we can all get it. So for the 2021 process, again, yeah, there are 13 total rules and they're all available, as I said, at the Civic Lex's website and the city's website, including a target completion date of November 3rd. We'll see if that November 3rd date is held. I think there's been a lot of comments about the proposed map. And I think a lot of people seem like they're not too happy about it. So again, I'm interested to see what Matt says about what they think the completion date will be, if it's going to be November 3rd as expected, or if they're going to extend it to the spring. Because I know they wanted public comment by the 20th, October 20th, and then they wanted to really have the map pretty much finalized by October 27th and ready to go for that November 3rd deadline. So I'm interested to see how that process works out. So Lexington and redistricting, moving on. If you look at the kind of population data, and just if you've been here for a few years, I've been here for about 11 years, and even in that period of time, it's changed. The city has changed so much. So I'm sure if you've lived here for a few decades, even more so, you've noticed a lot of things changing. But yeah, Lexington has changed significantly over the past half century. You can see that the city has added about 30,000 people almost every decade, except that 1980 to 1990, it stayed a little bit almost the same there, but we're adding at a pretty steady rate every year. So we can expect Lexington to keep growing at about the same rate that it has. So you can see now, this is the county, and the big sort of sage green on the outside, that's District 12. And then the rest, as you can see, the color coding 1 through 11 are kind of the smaller ones in the center. So if you've never seen this breakdown, I think it's pretty crazy that District 12 is like that big. Like, I don't think many people think about the fact that it's the rural district. It's a lot of the farmland that we have. So not a lot of people live out there. It's a lot of land, but not a lot of population, and that's kind of why the district breakdown is the way that it is. So the rest, 1 through 11, are more of the you have the urban core and then kind of the suburbs outside of that. So those are more populated districts, and they're smaller. So this is the 70s, and we'll go through the 70s through to the current time period that we're living in now. So the 70s, then you see the 80s, kind of flip back and forth, where you can see things change a little bit, kind of expanding to the east. The 90s, that big section in District 2 is Masterson Station. So you can see, oh, I'll go back. You can see where that happened. Did I skip the 90s? Yeah, that was the 90s and the 2000s. We expanded it out. That's Hamburg over on the east, kind of southeast side of the district, or of the county. That is District 6 and 7, I believe. And then the 2010s, kind of just continuing on that sort of overall trend. You see some changes in the inner districts a little bit. Not a ton, though, like in the previous decades. So Lexington redistricting, we have a lot of unique characteristics that that anyone working on redistricting has to weigh in redrawing boundaries. I don't know if you all have heard of the urban surface boundary, but that's a big limiting factor in, or just a factor to consider in Lexington's growth. So we have a rural and urban balance, and anyone doing redistricting work has to think about, or just development or anything like that, building houses. Does the rural area need more than one person representing it? So again, that whole area of the 12th district, only one person represents that entire area. So it's kind of a lot for one person to manage and be responsible for. But two arguments to that would be like, one is, it's a lot for one person to manage. But then the other one is that if you break it up, then you put more voting power. So the theory, like the one plan, I guess there was the compact plan that that I'm not going to talk a lot about, but it had the 12th being broken up into several districts, and it's sort of extending from sort of downtown center, close to downtown, out to the edge of the county. And it made sense, but then it was also, there was some pushback to it because the voting power would have been diluted since there are more people living close to the city center and less living out in the rural, sort of edge of the county. That rural voice would have been diluted by a lot of like the city interests. So you have to keep that in mind too, even if it makes sense visually and it looks more balanced. You have to think about where do people live and how are they voting and how would that be affected by the way that you draw boundaries. Communities of color represented on council, that's another big thing to consider when drawing boundaries. So Lexington is 25% people of color, yet only 1 out of our 15 council members are people of color, is a person of color. So that's a huge thing. And we've actually lost diversity on council over the last few years. There are a lot of people running for council in the next election, so I think that'll be interesting, but that's something that anyone redrawing districts needs to be considerate of. Like, where are populations, and if you're breaking them up, is that going to increase or decrease their voting power? And then also university representation. So UK has 29,400 students, I believe, and should only one person represent them. Like, that's a whole city on its own almost. And then thinking about sort of student interests and then the interests of the people living around campus that aren't students. And again, it's sort of the same as the 12th district. Should one person be responsible for all of those interests, or should it be broken up so that there's responsibility, there's more than one person sort of shouldering all of that responsibility, because it is tough. I know the 3rd district is pretty tough, and a few other districts where there's like a big difference between like voters' interests. I think those are the hardest districts to represent. And we'll talk about District 2. I think that's happened a lot there, or we've seen that occur in District 2. So where are we now? The Redistricting Committee met for the first time on August 25th, and again, they expect to be completed by November 3rd. They've adopted guidelines for the process, as I mentioned. They've heard from planning, GIS, and the kind of county clerk. So that was where they determined, the precincts were kind of the smallest pieces they could move around. And then they've combined iterative 1 and iterative 2 into one working draft map, and I'll show you this in a second. So on the left side, we have in bold. It's a little bit confusing, but the bold lines are the districts as they are now. And you'll see sort of like less bold lines, sometimes like a little bit beyond the bold line. And that's just to get like the district. I wanted to have the district numbers in these maps because I thought it's just easier to read it that way, to know what you're looking at. But the proposed lines are also there. So those are the like less bold lines that you might see. But that gives you a good idea. Just follow like the most bold lines. That shows you the current districts as they are right now. And so then the proposed map is on the right, and the kind of hatch marked like red areas are where precincts are changing. So it's color coded to that. It's the color of the district, and the red part is where the land is being moved to. So you can see kind of at the top of District 2, it's blue, and it's the red kind of cross hatching. So that was land taken from District 12 and put into District 2. And you can see around 11 as well, all the area that's kind of in that red cross hatching. That was District 2, and it's being moved to, or proposed to be moved to District 11. So that's kind of how you read that map, if it was a little bit confusing. So you can see there's some major changes here. I think it's really fascinating, like the map that they came up with. So you can see District 3 is gaining a ton of precincts, extending that line to, is that Man-o-War? I think that's Man-o-War, into District 4. So District 4 is losing a lot of precincts. So that's because District 4 was overpopulated. So they need to shift population kind of west, kind of northwest. So they got moved into District 10 and then 11, kind of moving people to District 11, because 11, I think, was the least populated. So that's another thing to think of, exactly, like talking about where populations are and where they expect people to move to. One thing about District 4 is that there's a parcel of land sort of at in the southeast corner. That's where Overbrook Farm is, I think, in District 4. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. But that's where Overbrook Farm is, and that's an area where there's going to be a lot of development. So they're predicting that a lot of people are going to move there and that's going to be an overpopulated district. So they really needed to shift people out of it. Since you can't pick up the whole district to move it, you got to do it by those small precinct areas. And so that's the idea. But as we've seen from a few emails, a lot of people are very unhappy about the prospect of moving into a different district. I think one person, we heard from a couple of people that were in the 3rd who got moved to the 10th who were not happy about that. So it'll be interesting to see the public's reaction as this map gets out and about a little bit more. More info. So 47 with this proposed map, 47 precincts, and that's affecting 49,874 people, will change districts if the working map is adopted. So that's where, again, where you're seeing in those kind of red shaded areas, and those are all precincts that will change. So the committee aimed to, as I said before, the committee aimed to correct population imbalances between the 4th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. So again, the shifting population from the 4th, like up and over to the 11th, kind of moving across the 9th and 10th as they went. And then the optimal population number for each district is 26,881. So some are a little bit over than that, some are a little bit under. And again, sort of making predictions for what's going to be happening in 10 years. The ones that are under are sort of right now are expected to gain population a little bit and kind of make up for that. So all of these, as Matt will talk about it, but there's so many variables that go into drawing these maps that I was amazed like how fast they were able to get this map done with how much they have to think about. And it just seems like every time you do one thing, it's like one step forward, 2 steps back. So I'm really just fascinated by this process. It's been really cool seeing it in the meetings. And so as the map exists now, the committee is asking for public input on the map before its next meeting on the 20th. So again, they're looking to do like a public input on the 20th, and in the meantime, between now and then, if you can't make that meeting, they're inviting anyone to email them comments or suggestions, anything like that, at redistrictlexington@gmail.com. And you can also contact your district council representative. You can find them on lexingtonky.gov, and you can find them on CivicLex as well. Or if you have any questions, if you don't know how to do that, stick around after this presentation, and I can talk to you about how to find and contact your district representative. We love helping people do that. But again, email them if you have anything you'd like to say. They really want to hear about it, and we always just want to make it easier for people to get in touch with the people who are making these decisions. So based on what you know, what do you think of Lexington's redistricting process? And we'll do another kind of discussion. Yeah. What did you think about how Lexington does redistricting and the effects of that work up until now, at least? Anybody want to jump in? No? No? Okay, that's fine. Oh, Jess, somebody else is here. Cool. Hello, Jess. We are almost finished with this presentation. I will.
Oh, so sorry, Megan. I think Harrison had something to add for your discussion question here.
Sure.
I have a question. Why exactly do we do every 10 years? Is that just how it always is, or is there specific reason for that here?
It's for the census. So every 10 years, the decennial census happens. So that's when you get a good, like a really comprehensive count of how many people live in an area. So we take that, or whoever's doing the redistricting committee takes those numbers and it adjusts the districts based on how that population changed over 10 years. So it's pretty much just based on the census. Did you take the census?
Yes. But
did you? Oh.
I'm from Louisville, so I'm sure it's a little bit different.
Yeah. And did you know anyone there at UK, if you are living, or it won't really matter in 10 years unless you're doing a very serious course of study, but if you're living on campus or living in a city that you're not, if you're going to school in a city that's not your hometown, you fill out the census as a resident of that city that you just fill it out as a resident of wherever you are currently living. So I've talked to a few people who are like, oh, but I go to UK, but I live in another city. We're like, no, fill out the census for the city that you live in currently. So if you're a student at UK and you live in Lexington, so you're from like Campbellsville or something like that, you would fill it out for Lexington. So just fun fact, it's not really going to matter to most of us here, but something to consider. Any other questions?
Would the same thing apply for out-of-state students?
Yes. Yep, you just fill out the census wherever you are at that time, which is kind of strange, but that's how it works. Anybody else? All right, I'll go back into it. Okay, moving on. So we'll look at districts 3 and 10 now. So District 3, this is Lexington's 3rd Council District. It's the University of Kentucky, Arboretum, section of South Nicholasville Road, and the downtown core, kind of south of Main Street. So if you're at UK, you're probably in District 3. You might not live in District 3, but anytime you're attending class, you're in District 3. And District 3's current population or current demographic breakdown is about 6% African American alone and about 6% Hispanic or Latino alone. So not the most diverse district in Lexington. Just keep that in mind. And it's changed over time since 1970. And you'll be able to see this in a map. So don't worry if this is a lot of text to throw at you. But since 1972, District 3 has increased in size and shifted kind of southeast from its original position. I'll just scroll. So this was the original District 3 placement. So then in 1982, it lost some area between Angliana and Red Mile, where it gains land, while it gained land where UK's W.T. Young Library now stands. So you can see that it kind of shifts east a little bit more, and around that kind of University Drive, Cooper Drive, Columbia Avenue, that's where the library is. So it gained some area there. I love scrolling back and forth in these maps. It's fun. And then 1992, it expanded south beyond Alumni and picked up kind of a fin of lands between East Main Street and East 3rd along Midland. So you can see that pop up here and then kind of expands down, past Cooper Drive, past Alumni. Gets a little bit bigger out there. And loses some land kind of to the east, like outside of West Short Street. So you can see how, when you're looking at maps like this, you can see how it kind of balances out. Like if it moves one direction, it often loses some land in the opposite direction. You're kind of balancing population out that way. And then in 2002, it expanded further east between East Main Street and Midland, and it also picked up area south of Rosemont Garden. So this is 2002. You can see that continues to move kind of east. You can see this around Richmond Avenue, Rosemont Garden there to the south. So continuing to expand out that way. And then finally in 2012, it expanded past Broadway into Angliana, Pine, and Oliver Lewis, as well as gaining the full triangle of land bounded by Nicholasville Road, Harrodsburg Road, and Waller Avenue. So we'll see that. You can see it kind of going west of, Broadway over there. And then it picks up like a little square of land over there by Berry Lane, and then Rosemont Garden and Wabash Drive. I've never actually said that road out loud, so I don't know if that's actually how it's pronounced. But you can see how that's changed. So then going back. I like those animations. So there you go. It's just funny. So moving on to District 10. District 10 includes the Beaumont and Palomar shopping and residential centers. If you've been over there, you're familiar with it. What is it? Moondance Amphitheater is over in Beaumont. So they do a lot of music events and things like that, as well as neighborhoods along Harrodsburg Road, south of West New Circle Road on the west side of Harrodsburg, and north of West New Circle Road on the east side of West New Circle Road. And it'll make sense once you see it on a map. So District 10's demographic breakdown, 17% African American alone and 20% Hispanic or Latino, and about 26,158 residents currently. So Beaumont is one of the wealthier districts in Lexington, especially with Beaumont and Palomar. You have neighborhoods like Firebrook, places like that. So a lot of wealth out there. So in 1972, this is the original, not the original, but this was just the position in 1972. So you can see it's kind of bounded by New Circle Road, a little bit like Rosemont Gardens, kind of the north end of it, a little bit past Harrodsburg Road. So District 10, again, mostly bounded by Clays Mill, New Circle, and Rosemont. In 1982, the district expanded east to Nicholasville Road. So you can see that moving over to Nicholasville. And then in 92, it picked up most of the land bounded by New Circle, Manowar, Harrodsburg Road, and Parker's Mill. This included what is now the Beaumont shopping and residential areas, and it also expanded south along Harrodsburg past Manowar. So you can see that picked up a lot of land. You can see all, for the Beaumont Circle area, Beaumont Center Lane, Roswell Drive, Leon Lane, kind of all of that area picks up a lot there. And then Spring Hill Drive kind of on the upper right. And then in 2002, District 10 lost area around Cross Keys Lane and Lake Allen. That's what District 11 kind of picked up, but expanded further south along Harrodsburg Road and gained a wedge between Bobolink Drive and Waller to the north. So we'll see that. Bobolink Drive and Waller. Lost some of that Cross Keys, Lake Allen. Oops, I keep doing that. Oh no, 2002. And then, yeah, gained a little bit more land kind of at the bottom of near the county line. And then in 2012, the district lost some area in the northwest around Garden Springs and Alexandria, and then gained more land west of Harrodsburg Road along the county line. So we'll see that in 2012. That's kind of what I just showed you. So you can see those changes. Again, you can see the balance here. So in 2002, had a lot more kind of to the north, and then in 2012, it lost that, but it gained more to the south. So it's just something to keep in mind. Original, kind of 1972, current. So let's hear from Matt now. Hold on, I'll stop share. So that's the presentation from us. Stop share. Any questions from that before we go into discussion with Matt? Anything you thought was interesting or like noticed about the districts over time? Anything like upsetting or frustrating about it? Do you not like Beaumont Center? Do you wish District 10 hadn't picked it up? Doesn't seem like it. No. Everyone loves Beaumont. It's great. Yeah, so Matt, tell us, so you've been on the committee now since, when did you start? I guess you can tell us like how you ended up on the committee, how long you've been going to meetings and what it's been like for you, kind of what you've learned and what are the challenges and sort of rewards being on the committee?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think so. I'm a member of the 3rd District. I live in near Woodland Park, and as Megan had mentioned, I'm kind of a map and data geek. I teach geography at UK, so I've spent a bit of time working with students and with faculty, but also with local neighborhood organizations and members of our government around kind of key questions that shape Lexington. So this has been a fun treat to be selected by the 3rd District rep, Hannah Legree, to be a part of this redistricting committee. I started in late August. I think that's when the first meeting was held. And as you sort of outlined, at our first meeting, we approved the 13 guidelines that are kind of set in by local orders. Those were guidelines not set by us; they were sort of handed to the committee and given. These are sort of our opportunities to interpret those where we can and hold them where we have to. So that I think you mentioned earlier that one of the unmovable bricks in a redistricting process in Lexington is the precinct. We can't splice a precinct. We can't cut one in half. They become basically our building blocks for how to appropriately balance the population. I thought it was interesting that you've created a kind of a really useful diagram to help explain how questions of equity emerge in a redistricting process. Interestingly, in our guidelines, equity is not necessarily an explicit guideline of redistricting. Anything beyond, I would say, population equalization, which is to say, getting around 26,900 people in each district would make our districts equal by the 2020 census. And of course, the planning department has projections for 2030, given rates of growth and construction bids and the placing of sewer lines and things that kind of help us indicate which parts of the city are open for growth and may grow faster than others. But yeah, our process has been in little 2-hour chunks. I think Kit and Megan know we sort of show up, we're handed a packet, and we try as best we can to get 15 people to think about and discuss the drawing of lines on maps in a room. And it's not entirely intuitive, I think, for many of us, like trying to figure out how to hold a number of these guidelines in our head. and trying to figure out which ones need to be prioritized in which neighborhoods in the city is also important. I think that, you know, in some respects, we're kind of all operating with a slightly different prioritization of guidelines. And those of us who have strong opinions about our districts also have our district bias that kind of sometimes operates as a more conservative district bias, and we don't want things to change in certain directions, and we don't want certain boundaries to be crossed from our own district's perspectives. So yeah, it's been an interesting process. I'd be happy to answer any questions or talk about the maps or whatever we want to do with this.
If nobody else, does anyone have a question like immediately?
I'd like to talk about the 3rd district.
Sure.
If I may, if this is the right time, is it the right time to ask questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I'm very interested to know what the rationale was behind taking the 3rd district all the way out to New Circle Road to include neighborhoods like Malibu, Belafonte, neighborhoods that I would consider, I also live in the 3rd district, neighborhoods I would consider very suburban in a way, whereas I've always come to think of the 3rd district as a downtown and urban surrounding district with UK stuck in the middle. So I think just contemplating this expansion in that direction, and I understand how it's all has to happen, and I think it's very complicated, and I think that you've done a remarkable job, but I also feel that this is changing the flavor of the 3rd district pretty radically. And I'm wondering, when you talk about some people who've made some objections, I also wonder about the people in that little Triangle Park corner that have gotten chopped out as well and added into the 11th district, which is very much of a sales road, very different demographic, people, representation issues that I would think those people who live in South Hill don't necessarily identify with the 11th district. So I'm thinking there's going to be a bit of a furrow. I don't envy you, except you're probably not the target. But could you tell me how those conversations went, so that, and whether it was an easy decision or whether you still are a little bit uncomfortable about this, as am I?
Yeah, I think these are, is your name Kate? Thanks for joining. I think this is, I think
I've been here. I had to run down and feed the dogs, and I had to do a couple other things. So I was kind of not here, but I was present the whole time.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, I think, I'm really fascinated by this entire process. I think there are parts of it that are frustrating, and there are parts that require a bit of projection forward of what things could be like in the future. So I think because of those moments of projection, I think it's really important that as many people kind of voice their frustrations and opinions with this kind of first.
Mine's more puzzled. I'm just puzzled.
Yeah, no, and maybe I can tell you a little bit about some of that process. I think as Megan mentioned, there were two what are called iterative 1 and iterative 2 maps that were circulated. Iterative 1, which is the one that has been modified by the entire committee and released to the public, was based first upon 2030 projections, and, if I could say secondly, was based upon a concern for compactness. These were maps that were originally drawn by the GIS department. Both iterative 1 and iterative 2 are maps that were really drawn by our city government's GIS department, with a few modifications, less than 10, I would say, by each of the working groups within the committee. The iterative 1 map, which has been basically modified and released to the public, was based upon a more prioritizing certain of those redistricting guidelines around compactness, around trying to maintain an idea about growth. A lot of it is speculative. I think from the perspective of 3rd district, what strikes me is that there is about a 700 person gap in the third district between where the third district is today and where it needs to be to maintain population equalization. That's not as bad as District 11 and District 10, who are getting closer to 2,000 underpopulated. And as you know, in this kind of puzzle piece, you move one line in order to sort of adjust other lines, and something has to give. Now, as Megan kind of showed the 1972 through the 2012 maps, one of the things I noticed about the third district is it's moving in this kind of amorphous shape that begins to kind of capitalize on downtown, but also extend toward the southeast. And a lot of that has to do with population patterns in Lexington since the expansion of the urban services boundaries in the 1970s and again in the 1990s. And so there is Lexington is not growing equally, right? The entire county is kind of growing unequally, which is why District 7 and District 6 are overpopulated right now, given population equalization. So, God, I'm already talking too much about this. So the Overbrook Farm precinct, which is in the southeastern part of the city off of Tate's Creek, is a single precinct that kind of, I think of it as this large granite rock that you can't really move. It's projected to have 6,000 people living in it in 2030. 6,000 out of an entire district is close to a fifth of the population of an equalized district. So it's kind of a third rail, you might say. No one really wants to touch it right now. We don't even know if it's actually going to develop in the way that it's going to develop, but it's inside the urban services boundary, and sewage lines have been drawn. There's definitely an indication that those are going to be developed parcels. That's in the southeast corner. On the western side of District 10 and District 11, we have the Armory and the Airport precinct, which is not highly populated, but again, cannot really allow us to kind of move the population as it grows. So what effectively happened in Iterative 1's plan is the third district moves south to push the fourth district down, which then opens up and pushes the ninth district over to the west, which then, in order to equal out the population and really give more people to District 10 and District 11 because it's underpopulated, you have a borrowing from District 2 and indeed the Triangle Park precinct, which is a highly populated precinct of about 2,000 people, moving into District 11, which needs to happen because District 10 is having to take from District 11 and from District 3 in order to get its population equalized. Now, all that to say, that's Iterative 1. The second iterative plan, which is Iterative 2, actually started with fewer precinct changes. And it's not one that I believe has been circulated to the public, or if it has, it's sort of buried in the bureaucratic marginalia on the website for the redistricting website. Iterative 2 has a different starting point. As I said earlier, Iterative 1's starting point was compactness and primarily a question of population potential, of population projection in 2030. Iterative 2 starting point was merely population equalization and, secondly, as few precinct changes as possible, right? So the starting point was a difference of close to, I think, 30 in terms of the number of precincts that were changed in Iterative 2. Iterative 2 looks more like our current district, but is not prioritizing, again, in the guidelines, is not prioritizing growth, nor is it prioritizing what the city calls compactness, but is actually guideline number 7, which is about aggregating areas with similar cultural characteristics. So, I like you, Kate, think that this is going to generate some pointy discussions, I think, on October 20th. And I kind of hope that we are open to hear it, because I think this is, the nature of these kinds of debates and discussions is that we want to sort of figure out, we want to hear from people in the third district that say, Triangle Park is part of the third district. Malibu isn't, right? I'd be curious to hear that. I like you, I'm not so certain about not Bel Air, but the Malibu, Zandale sort of and south.
Belafonte. Yeah.
I'm not as familiar with those districts, with that part of the currently the 4th district. I know that there's a need to grow the 3rd district. We need to grow a little bit in order to sort of maintain population equalization moving forward to 2030. In 2030, we're projected to have districts that need to be closer to 29,000 people. Given the current rate of growth over the last 20 years, we need to be getting closer to 29,000 people in each of our districts. Now, District 7 and District 6 are almost already there in 2020, right? So in District 6 and District 7, they've already hit the 2030 projection, which is where District 3 needs to be. So I think, thinking forward about this, District 3 is going to have to figure out, where is our growth going to be? Where are we going to grow in District 3? Are we going to have to borrow from District 5 and take more of Chevy Chase, take more of Kenwick? As someone in Woodland Park area, that seems consistent to me.
Right, to me as well. Yeah, it does to me.
But one of the constraints, as you know, and these are all shoulds, if you look in the guidelines, one of the shoulds is that we should not remove a current council member from their district. And Liz Sheehan, District 5, sits really close to the District 3, District 5 guideline or boundary,
Yeah.
which creates, again, another kind of large granite stone that feels difficult to move around. How we grapple with this between now and 2030 is, of course, someone else on this committee will have to figure this out. But I kind of think we've got to figure out some combination where the 3rd district has to grow somewhere. Whether or not, I think there is something compelling, I have to say, about District 11 continuing to develop the Versailles Road corridor. And so I think District 11's moving into District 2 territory makes sense to me. I'm not from those districts, so I can't really speak on behalf of those districts. But to me, looking at a map of Lexington, it makes sense that with the continued development along Versailles Road, we're going to want people who are thinking about the connectivity between Cardinal Valley and Rupp Arena and downtown. And so, how we do that, I think, is still up for debate. There are, on the city should be credited for putting as much of this online, but oftentimes it feels like we only get these 2-hour chunks to work with it, and then all of a sudden it's released to the public. So I kind of feel like there's a lot more work that we need to be doing. We are kind of artificially, I feel like, boxed in to this early November deadline. I think we're going to need more time to kind of sort this out in our committee. So
that sort of leads me to my next question, and I don't mean to hog this. Sorry, there are maybe other people who have a question.
Yeah. Let's.
I see somebody's hand up. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, let's go to them. Who had a hand?
Kit.
Yeah, Matt, I was just wondering if you could talk for a minute just about the committee, like who's on it, what sort of people are there, how that workflow is going, and what you do to kind of be selected.
I don't know how people get selected, to be honest, but I get the sense that these are people like myself who care about the district they live in. They're likely to be people that are known by their council representative as someone who's sort of committed to the district, but also to the city. I think we've got 3 members of this 15-member committee who are selected by our at-large council members. So one, Bill Wilson, who is the chair of the committee, selected by Vice Mayor Kay, and then 2 other members of the committee, they're selected by Chuck Ellinger and Maloney on the committee, and then another 12 members that are interested in specifically their district. But in general, I would say the discussions, and I'm curious what other people who've attended these meetings say, but I feel like the discussion has largely been about the city, about how do we champion the growth that's happening in the city by reflecting that through the district guideline, through the district boundaries. I'm not hearing a lot of don't change my district kind of sentimentality. I guess I expected more of that. But there are people who have, I think, ideas about what the district should feel like. and then I think that those people are able to have some of those conversations with the committee. But in general, we're kind of like nose deep in data and maps most of the time for those 2 hours every week or so. So the committee discussions have mostly just been in small little work group sessions, looking precinct by precinct. I think we spend a lot of time just looking at a single precinct, contemplating what its population is currently and what its population is projected to be, and with some attention to race and ethnicity, and trying to sort of maintain the character of existing districts. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of potential to go off the rails, I think. And maybe we'll see that on October 20th.
Can you talk a little more, or does anyone have any questions? I'd like to hear from the UK folks. Anyone there have any questions for Matt?
I had a second question, if I can ask.
I do. I'll come back to you in just a minute.
Sure.
I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. Doesn't look like it. Nobody from UK. I have one for you, Matt. If you could speak a little bit more about the guidelines and how those affected. Explain a little bit more of the guidelines and then how you're thinking about those as you're looking at the maps. And like, does one kind of bubble up to the forefront a little more, or are you considering them all over time, like pretty equally?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's not really possible to hold them all. I mean, a computer can do this, and in some ways, the iterative 1 and iterative 2 were done with a team of computer professionals who produce iterative 1 and iterative 2's first drafts based on a calibration of the guidelines. Some of the guidelines, I mean, probably 4 or so of the guidelines are really just about, you can't cut up a precinct. You have to group these together. They have to be adjacent to each other. You can't have a district that has a donut in it with another district kind of trapped inside of it. Like, you can't do these kinds of things. But a lot of the other guidelines use the word should instead of shall. Shall is sort of like a do not touch third rail. Shoulds are guidelines. And in as much as we try to attend to all of them, there's some of them that just don't get attended to, I think. Just as a quick reminder, some of these shoulds are obviously population equalization. We should equalize the population. To me, that's a really important one, right? Because we're talking about making sure that everyone has equitable representation on council. If a district falls below the 27,000 we want a district to be at, that means that those people are getting over-representation, right? So if you have fewer people in a district to one council member, each member of that district has over-representation. If you have a district that has way more people than 27,000, like District 7 currently has closer to 29,000 people, that is a situation where District 7 has underrepresentation on council, meaning the number of people in that district compared to the number of council reps that they have on council is not as favorable as districts that have closer to 27,000 people. So to me, as a member of this, I'm really interested in making sure that we have an eye on population equalization both today and 2020, and then a reasonable attention to where we might grow. I think some of the population projection in some districts might be overblown, but I think in other places it does make sense that there's going to be growth continuing in the east, in the southeast, and up to the north along Georgetown Road Corridor. I see, I believe the planning staff when they say these areas are going to grow faster than other parts of the city. And in 10 years, if we do grow at the same rate, we're going to need all of our districts to be closer to 29,000. So for me, that's a really important guideline, paying attention to population equalization in 2020 and paying attention to the possibilities of growth and how that will impact representation on council, representation in the city in 2030. There's some other ones in here that are also important that I also care about. New districts should be formed with as little change as possible to existing districts. Also, keeping the council member in their current district, that we shouldn't try to disrupt neighborhood associations. I know in my working group, we spend a lot of time looking at neighborhood associations, both in District 9 and 10 and 11. As we started to make some of those big movements in 9, 10, and 11, we pulled up the neighborhood association boundaries and tried to fix some issues that we saw in the current council district configuration that was splitting neighborhood associations. One of the guidelines is also that we should use arterial highways and other corridors, including railroads, as boundaries in defining district boundaries. And I think, there are some big ones in our community. And I think each district has their own sense about what are the big boundaries that define their district. And I think, we tried as best we could to look at how well district drawing uses those kinds of major boundaries as their boundaries in the district. But so, yeah, there's a lot of things to kind of balance in this process.
Thank you. Kate, go ahead. You can go ahead with your question.
So sorry to interrupt. Just before that, we're gonna head out because Hannah Legree is here, so we want to have some time to talk with her. But thank you so much for hosting the Civic Lex. We really appreciate it. It was a great time.
Thank you all. We appreciate you all tuning in.
There you go. You got some waves. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you, Matthew.
See y'all.
All right.
So me now, okay. On the 20th, Matt, when there is public input, how much actual weight will be given to people who resist and verbally express their resistance to being moved into another district? Is it something where there is still some built-in flexibility, or is this just an opportunity for people to say something, get it off their chest, but that ultimately the lines have been literally drawn?
I don't know how to answer that question, actually. I think what I've been told is that we operate in the committee as an advisory to the council. The actual council, the district boundaries are effectively approved by council. So we provide a series of, I'm hoping that we will provide a series of maps. So it's not just a map, but which is what has sort of unfolded more recently. It would be interesting, I think, to kind of look at two different developments in our committee: the developments on iterative 1, which is the one that the public has seen, and the development on iterative 2, which the public has access to, but has not been publicized in the same way. I do think that I like you, Kate, think that if enough people point out that there is a drastic amount of change unequally across the city, in the sense that District 1, District 5, District 6, District 7 are not changing as much as District 3, 4, 9, 10, 11. Those districts are changing more in this iterative 1 scenario. I think if enough people point out that we need to kind of go back to the drawing board, I do believe that in our discussions in the committee, we have one of these somewhat in our back pocket. We have iterative 2, right, which has fewer precinct changes and fewer precinct changes in this kind of boundary between 3, 4, 9, 10, 11. I think if enough public input sort of says we don't care about compactness, we don't care about major arterial boundaries for our borders, and we particularly don't trust population projection, that to me is a signal from the public saying, in your redistricting guidelines, you need to prioritize not changing the districts, keeping the council person in their district, and maintaining population equalization for 2020, and not focus on growth. And if that message comes through, I think it's our responsibility on the committee to kind of tell council, hey, we're getting public input saying that in these shoulds, in the 7 or 8 shoulds that we're meant to interpret in this process, they're saying, don't pay attention to growth, don't pay attention to compactness or aggregating similar things that are like each other, and don't pay attention to arterials or railroad roads or major roads as primary boundaries of these districts. And if we get that message from the public, then I don't see why we wouldn't try to reconfigure our map to better reflect the prioritization that we're hearing from the public. But in the least, I would be a proponent of at least making sure the public's aware that there was another map that was pushed through working group. I think to say that we combined iterative 1 and iterative 2 into this new map is not entirely accurate. I think we started in the most recent meeting, which was, what was that, like last week? In that meeting, we started with iterative 1. We didn't actually look at iterative 2, which has fewer precinct has fewer precinct changes. So I kind of think that, if there is a great deal of input, we could always at least make sure that the public knows that there was another iterative 2 as a starting point. then go from there. I think we're responsible for interpreting about 7 or 8 shoulds, and you can't please all of them, but we have to figure out which ones are the most important for the communities that we're meant to serve. But
thanks. I want to ask you all, what do you think, for each of you, what do you think is an important guideline when you think about your community and what it, like, what do you, when you think of, your neighborhood or your district, and the prospect of it changing, or of it moving to a, like your neighborhood moving to a different district, what is important to you, and what do you think maybe like the most important guideline to you is, I guess, the question I'm trying to ask. And I will throw that to Jess, because I haven't heard anything from Jess. Sorry, if you're there.
Jess may not be there.
Jess may not be there. Oh.
I'm at soccer practice, so that's why I was on mute.
It's okay.
I've really just been I'm actually in District 9, so I know this was about 3 and 10, but I wasn't really sure how that was going to affect 9. From the maps, it doesn't look like it moves my district at all. I guess I wonder what the main concern would be. What would be the concern people might have for their district moving? Like why would a person have a problem with it? I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm just saying, what would you think would be the biggest objections that you are likely to hear about them moving into a different district, or different neighborhoods moving into their district? What the main objections would be, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kate sort of summed up, I think, one perspective in 3rd District is that we may think of ourselves as a downtown district, a downtown plus UK, and what UK means is seemingly expansive. But I think we think of ourselves as sort of a downtown district. And, the composition of a district, I think, is it's not entirely clear how that matters, except when you start to go to city council meetings and you see how your council representative has to grapple with their constituency. And when your constituency is drawn from a diverse group of people from a variety of different socioeconomic backgrounds, but also different kind of choices about how they want to live. Do they need a white picket fence, or are they cool with what's called cheek by jowl urban development? And so I think a council rep has to sort of figure out how do we balance the interests of our constituency. I know that in the committee meetings, I've referenced a number of times that I think the 2nd District, which currently stretches all the way from western suburbs, which is in downtown, all the way out to Masterson Station and the horse farms, that's a district that to me has a really hard time to say that they have a singular constituency. And you see that reflected in the decisions that are made in council. Because that representative has to grapple with a variety of different people from different backgrounds. Now, I think people from a variety of different backgrounds and interests can make a district really vibrant. I think one of the things that makes 3rd District really vibrant is that there is a kind of a wide variety of interests and political opinions in the 3rd District. But we're not a suburban district, right? We're not, we don't tend to have the same kind of suburban developments in the 3rd District. Now, is there a reality that, in another 10 years, will the 3rd District have to sort of grow in some direction that will likely incorporate 1950s and 60s suburban development? Probably. Will the 3rd District instead grow out toward Chevy Chase and kind of agglomerate onto Ashland Park, past, Kenwick, in that direction? That's another possibility. So I think we are going to have to grow. Where that direction happens is kind of up for debate. I tend to think that we have to pay attention to questions of race and ethnicity as well. So in the earliest iterations of what was called the compact plan, which I call the pizza pie plan, was basically to take a little bit of downtown, a little bit of UK and Transy, and a little bit of horse farm and put it in all 12 districts. while I think, that could be a nightmare for trying to build political constituency in the horse farms, I think it would also be a nightmare to try to build minority politics in downtown. If you start to cut up the largely African-American community in downtown and north of downtown, if you start to cut up the Hispanic community in Cardinal Valley, you end up reducing the overall percentage of those minority groups in each district. So I think this is what demographers call packing and cracking. Do you want to pack your district with lots of like things, or do you want to crack the like things up into multiple different districts? There isn't necessarily a right way to do this. It's different for every district. But I think we want to pay attention to histories of districts and how districts kind of develop a character of their own. And I think it's one that, I think we will probably hear more about on October 20th from people who particularly feel that the character of the district has been assailed in this most recent iterative one plan.
And the issues that matter to those districts, the things that are worth it to the constituents to fight for.
Yeah.
And I think things, like the ADUs, for example, would have a completely different impact on people who live more in the core center of the 3rd district than the folks that live out in Belafonte, who probably have bigger lots and might be more amenable to, say, a detached dwelling in their backyard. Whereas people who live in sort of student dense neighborhoods, it's horrific to even consider. So I think it's maybe issues as well. And those folks that live in South Hill have no relationship with many of the people who live all the way down to Sales Road. I just think it's very interesting. And I really thank you for your time in serving on this committee.
No, I think it's been fascinating. So I feel grateful to be a part of the conversation.
I was doing that. You touched on just, I was thinking like on one of the meetings that I went to, they were talking about like the Hispanic population in the 12th district and then in the 11th district. And you sort of illuminated that a little bit, talking about like, how are you looking at the population? And is it like population as a whole or as a percentage? And can you talk about like what was going on in that conversation? Why, maybe just elaborate on that a little bit, because I think that's important if you're thinking about like talking about packing and cracking districts and moving or breaking up populations and voter power. So I think that was an illustration of like how that is, like a real life, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think the conversation you're referencing was basically a data question, really, but it has political importance. So if you look at let's just take the Hispanic population in Lexington. If you look at them as a raw count, meaning that you just look at the number of individuals who identify as Hispanic on the census by census tract, or in this case by precinct, you're getting, in one sense, you're getting just a kind of a map of general kinds of density of population. And in certain parts of the city, more people live closer together. And so you're going to have more people who represent difference living in those areas as well. And in terms of population, we tend to like to look at what's called normalized population, which is to say, take the number of individuals who identify as Hispanic on the census and divide that by the total number of people living in that precinct. And that gives you a percentage of the number of people who are Hispanic in that district. That oftentimes gives us a more accurate representation of difference in communities. For instance, in looking in the 12th district, there might be a high number of people who identify as Hispanic in that district, but as a percentage of the total number of people living in that area, it's actually quite small. So I think looking at population normalization helps us get a better sense of that overall percentage of population difference by precinct. And so I think there's a number of issues that pop up when you start to translate census data through the census tract system down into the voting precinct system. This is not a perfect process. There's actually a lot of room for error. And so I think, what's more useful is to think about the histories of these districts, their kind of cultural readability, I think is important. Kate, I think the question of like, what do people in South Hill district have to do with people living in Cardinal Valley? I'm of a couple minds about that, and I'm curious. I'm glad to hear your perspective as well. I kind of feel like, as a corridor, they have a lot at stake, South Hill and Versailles Road, just in the sense that, if you look at sort of how the development of the all-tech campus has kind of changed an entrance into the downtown core, in the sense that it's a very inviting sort of entrance, that kind of brings people into the downtown core along that corridor from Versailles Road that enters onto Maxwell. I kind of wonder similarly, how can we extend that type of development further down Versailles Road, that sort of thinking about how does this become an entry point into the downtown. And I think, we're seeing the city invest some good money in public infrastructure. There's now a better sidewalk that takes people down Versailles Road toward Cardinal Valley. And I kind of anticipate, along with other people who are studying housing in the city, that this area, just kind of north of Versailles Road, further out, but kind of halfway between downtown and the horse park, and Keeneland, is going to be experiencing, I think, a great deal of development in the next 10 years. The recipe, or the temperature is right for a certain kind of development to happen in these spaces. And I would kind of want whoever is representing the District 11 to kind of think about how that interfaces with downtown in a really important way. And so I don't know. I think you're right. They are different populations. They have different needs. But I think it might be one of these situations where it would be interesting to have those needs brought into conversation by the council person who represents that district. So I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious to get other people's comments on that Triangle Park precinct, because it's a large precinct. I think it's close to 2,000 people in that precinct. Not a high number of voters who are registered comparatively, but an interesting sort of entry point into downtown, no doubt. Should District 3 only occupy downtown? I think there's a good chunk of the downtown that's obviously in District 1. Historically, District 2 has occupied a good chunk of the western portion of downtown. I see District 2 moving further out toward Masterson Station and becoming much more of a Masterson Station and outside of New Circle district, I think, as this process unfolds. The development along the Manchester Street, the Distillery District, the new town branch, Commons Park, the modifications to Rupp. I think these are all going to be important aspects of our community. Should District 3 control all of those, all the way from Rupp Arena, all the way down to Thoroughbred Park and up to Bell Court? I'm not sure.
I personally, this is my personal hat, I live in Cardinal Valley, and I take High Street to Versailles Road almost every day going home, and I do see that as like it makes sense to connect those areas, because it's like we had better a little bit safer sidewalks, which they're working on, and a bike lane. Like if there was a good bike lane, it would just be so easy to just connect from where I am to downtown. So that really makes sense to me. At least, and then having connecting the Distillery District to it, I think that's proposed and District 11 kind of overtaking that area a little, is really interesting to me as well. Just creating a little bit more activity in District 11, because right now it's pretty much residential. There's no shops and things around there, so just giving a little bit more, I think, is interesting. I don't know.
There's another, I think, part of this that it's unfortunately I don't think anyone from District 10 is here, but maybe there is. I don't know. So in the proposed iterative 1, there's a couple of precincts that are historically in District 3 that have been moved to District 10. This is kind of in the area just to the west of Nicholasville Road, kind of between Nicholasville Road and that railroad that runs kind of past Rosemont Garden. That's another sort of interesting set of questions. There's a precinct called Imperial, which is directly to the west of the railroad. So it's currently in District 3, but it's separated from the rest of District 3 by a railroad. is its housing, quality similar to District 3? Probably. It faces or connects more with Broadway/Harrodsburg Road. Does it make sense to keep that kind of what I would think is a kind of an island of District 3 out in what is now sort of District 11 land? I'm not sure. But I'd be interested to hear from people who are really adamant that the Imperial Precinct is a District 3 precinct. We don't belong in District 10. But it's one of those other situations where it doesn't really align with the guidelines as we've accepted them. And it does present opportunities for us to kind of grow District 10 and District 11 in the ways that it needs to in order to sort of get ready for the population growth that's going to happen in other parts of the city. So there's also a Goodrich precinct, which is directly kind of south of, it's along Nicholasville Road. It's currently in District 3. It's now in District 10, according to the Iterative 1 plan. It's another area that I think has a lot of character that's similar to the Rosemont Garden core, but it's somewhat of a casualty of this need to prioritize population equalization and finding areas that could be utilized to beef up the population in District 10 and District 11. Yeah, so I don't know. I think I'm hoping that there's enough public input to kind of push us in one direction or another. If the public really says we want to prioritize current districts as opposed to population growth, then I think that's what we'll try to work with. The city legal department tells us that we can't have more than a 5% plus or minus deviation between districts, which means that districts have to maintain plus or minus 5% population equalization between each other in order for it to pass legal muster in the city. There are districts that currently don't do that. District 7 is 11% over, right? So something has to change in order to get population equalization under that 5%.
Does this give you any, and for the group as a whole, for the committee, does it make you think any differently about city planning and things Lexington could do in the future to make this process easier or to guide growth in a different way? I'm curious about that. Or mistakes that maybe Lexington had made in the past that sort of led us to where we, I don't know.
Well,
how does it make city planning and how the city
if I'm showing my cards, I'm a big proponent of the urban services boundary. I think it's really important that we maintain pedestrian friendly and walkable city streets. And to me, continuing to expand in some of the areas of the city that we're seeing expansion in only we're kicking the can down the road of what that's going to create in terms of issues. It doesn't solve the affordable housing crisis that we currently have in the city. It doesn't solve our public transport nightmare in the city by growing in these parts of the city. I think we've got to do something with Nicholasville Road. I'm not sure how, I think historic preservation has its place in certain parts of our neighborhoods, but I'm not sure that historic preservation is working well in and along Nicholasville Road. I think we've got to imagine a different kind of transport corridor down on Nicholasville Road. And I think that includes how do we grapple with housing on that corridor. So I do think there are some opportunities, in infill and redevelopment, but they're really small potatoes, I think. And I think right now developers in our city really want to go for the easy win. And for them, that's formerly horse farm tracks that are inside the urban services boundary. And I think a lot of LBAR, our kind of cabal of realtors, really believe that affordable housing will be answered by expanding in those parts of the city. And I don't think that's true in any other North American city. So I don't think by adding to the suburbs, we solve the affordable housing crisis. I think we've got to prioritize affordable housing in the city, in all parts of our city, and not just assume that suburban tract development is going to make housing more affordable for the people who need it. Yeah, I think I really hope that whatever council configuration emerges from these districts, that one of the key things that they see value in is protecting our pedestrian walkability in the places where we need it and expanding it where it doesn't currently exist. And I think that's something that I think is bound up in this discussion about keeping our density through the urban services boundary.
Thanks, Matt. Are there any, we're running out, we're about 4 minutes away from 7:30. Are there any other questions or comments you all have? Or just things, things you want to bring up before we end at 7:30? Not seeing anything. No. Well, thank you all for being here. Matt, do you have any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to add? No.
Nope. If anyone's watching this on Facebook later, like be sure to mark October 20th and come and tell us or send an email so that we have some sense of public input into this.
And that's redistrictlexington@gmail.com. Correct. Yeah. Well, thank you again for being here and for your expertise and talking about this process with us. It's complicated and there are a lot of people working on this and a lot of moving parts. So we'll try to get the word out. Everyone here, please tell your family and your neighbors, anyone living in Lexington, that this meeting is happening. And if they have any input they'd like to share, please do either reach out or try to make it to that meeting. Do you know where it's going to be? Is it in the Phoenix building or the government center?
No, I'm pretty sure we're in council chambers again. So it's in the second floor of main building. Yeah.
10 o'clock a.m. on the 20th. And at that, if you want to find more information, again, you can visit civiclex.org or the city's redistricting hotline, search for at lexingtonky.gov. And if you have any questions, again, you can email the committee at redistrictlexington@gmail.com, or you can email CivicLex staff, it's Megan or Richard or Kit at civiclex.org. You can just choose any one of us, and we'd love to hear from you as well. At that, we'll go ahead and call it a night. And again, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank y'all. Good to meet you, Kate. Bye.
Bye.